This is Coda Radio, episode 89 for February 17th, 2014. Hi everyone, you're listening to Coda Radio, Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly talk show taking a pragmatic look at the art and business of software development and related technologies. This episode is brought to you by our three fine sponsors, GoDaddy, Ting, and DigitalOcean. I'll tell you more about those great sponsors as this here show goes on. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our excellent host on the East Coast, Mr. Michael Dominic. Hey there, Michael.
Guten Morgen.
How you feeling, buddy?
Been better.
Yeah, I could hear it in your voice.
Oh, yeah.
I had it last week. So last week, my voice was like cutting out during the shows, and I was constantly hitting the mute button, coughing, and blowing my nose. I tried to cover it all up so that way I wasn't grossing anybody else out at home, but I was suffering. Now we flipped roles. It seemed, if you got about what I had, it seems to last about a week. I'm not 100% yet, but I figure by Wednesday, which is when it really hit me the worst, I should be okay. You gonna be able to make it?
That's super suboptimal.
I know. It does make working particularly hard.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, I woke up this morning to, it's the kind of thing that nobody ever wants to deal with when they do a show first thing in the morning, and that is total software failure. You ever had one of these days where you plan to sit down and start working, and all of a sudden, like, the thing you use to do your job just stopped functioning? Does that ever happen to you?
Several times last year.
Yeah, so, we use Wirecast to broadcast, and every show has its own unique profile, so I get out in the morning and I restart the stream and I load up the Coda Radio profile, and it's got all of our shots and our, artwork and all that stuff, and the program, when I load the Coda Radio profile, just refuses to start. Won't even load. It just, locks up, and I have to force quit it, and so last minute, literally at 8:30, so a half hour before we started, I'm sitting there rebuilding the profile based on another similar profile, similar show. And it was like this emergency operation. And it's one of those things where you have no idea. Is it going to be working in time? I don't know. I'm just going to keep working as fast as I can to make it work and hope that I reach my deadline. So that was my fun morning. I didn't even get a chance to make myself a cup of coffee.
You know what, Chris? You're in good company. I actually only have green tea today. So.
Oh, well, that's good for the voice. For the voice. Speaking of coffee, let's do a little quick coffee update. Kobe sent in a Kickstarter that is now, it is finished. So this is not an active Kickstarter you can contribute to. And man, I think he actually sent it in to us when it was still active. Oh, fully funded on December 8th. No, he didn't. I would love to have gotten in on this. Check this thing out. This is called the world's first roast grind brew coffee machine. Mm. And tell me how much you love this. You throw in raw green coffee beans and it comes out as fresh black coffee at a single push of a button. How cool is that? And I'll play a little bit of their video because they got a pretty good video here with some cool music. Yo, yeah.
Hi, my name is Hans, and I have a dream. I want everybody out there to enjoy the fairest and freshest coffee possible. Therefore, my incredibly passionate team and I have spent the last 2 years developing a machine that can do the job. Now we need your support. Help us to change the way coffee is perceived, traded, and enjoyed.
Man, I tell you what, because this is the only thing is when I get really crazy busy, I don't have time to grind the coffee and wait for it to stew in the AeroPress. So I don't get my cup of coffee anymore. Whereas before with the K-Cups, I at least would push a button. Now for me, the coffee's so much better. That's well, if I can't have good coffee, I'm not having coffee. I'm a snob now, right? Because I'm all sophisticated all of a sudden. But this is the way of the future, my friend. And they wanted $135,000. They got $681,000.
Right. So hold a tick, though. I'm reading their Kickstarter. I'm a little behind, folks, because dying. It appears that you're intended to purchase the beans unroasted.
Yeah.
Now, that's very interesting.
Yeah, I know it is.
Because one of the reasons I buy some of the beans I buy is because of the roaster, how they do it.
Sure, yeah. Well, if I would assume if you wait to roast it till you're closer, it goes from roast to grind to brew all in one.
It's got to be a fantastic cup of coffee.
I would think so, right? I don't know how I didn't hear about this. Apparently, it was on TechCrunch, NBC News. I'm out of it, I guess. Look at them though. If anybody, when this becomes a product, let us know, because I'll probably miss that announcement too. But I think it's a pretty cool idea. And okay, there's a picture of it, kind of, sort of and it's from Bravade, which I've heard of that company before, or Bravoda, Bonavita, whatever it is. A company I've heard of before that's involved with coffee. So that's pretty exciting. Coffee. And one last little coffee update. This is the flip side of what we've been talking about. Jan wrote into the subreddit. He says, hey, Michael and Chris, I hear you like to talk about coffee a lot, so here's my story. I'm a 21-year-old programmer from Europe, and I never drunk coffee before. I came to Canada, and I remember I had my first espresso and felt a strong buzz from just a few sips. Anyway, I started drinking coffee, and it allows me to be more productive. Instead of 6 hours, I can do 10 or 12 hours of programming. However, I think I might have gone too far. Today, for instance, I had 2 cups of coffee, 2 caffeine pills, 2 scoops of caffeine powder, and 4 oolong teas. I feel like a heroin addict at this point. I need more and more of this stuff. Yeah, well, that is pretty intense, my friend. That is actually, oh boy. He says, when I wake up in the morning, the first thing that comes to mind is how fast can I get some caffeine intake? Throughout the day, whenever the caffeine stops, I start feeling like S, and I need another intake. Since the caffeine half-life is 5 hours, I sometimes drink till late in the evening. I can't go to sleep till morning hours either. I feel like I'm wrecking my body. What should I do? Should I just hard quit and go through caffeine withdrawal? Or should I just try to taper over time? Thanks. Have you ever run into anything like this, Mike?
No.
No?
Not to the levels this guy's. All right, so you need to stop.
Yeah. I have sleep apnea, and so I have definitely struggled with the so tired my brain literally cannot function. And so I got pretty heavy into caffeine energy drinks, and for me, really, it was the sugar that was, I think, really killing me.
Sure.
I just found when I start to notice my intake's too high, I just start to slow it down. The other thing that kind of sounds like just kind of based, I wonder how he's spacing it out, but I'm not a doctor, okay? But what I recall reading, and you can go look this up, is if you ingest a ton of caffeine and then you let it ride all the way down and then ingest another type of caffeine, more caffeine, your body's going through this yo-yo process, where is if you kind of just you can start with one strong intake of caffeine in the morning and then just keep a slow, mild intake of caffeine throughout the day. So maybe you start with a strong cup of coffee or 2, and then you switch to tea for the rest of the day. Cut out the pills, cut out the scoops, stuff like that.
Yeah, I would say definitely drop the pills. I mean, there's no call for that.
Right, and the number one thing you can do, right, is improve your sleep quality. And so maybe say stop drinking, and this you're going to have to pay you're going to have to pay off some debt for a few weeks probably. But stop drinking around 3 o'clock, maybe 2 o'clock. Experiment with that for 4 days. And see if your sleep dramatically improves, because the way you kind of, I have found I weaned off caffeine is you have to resolve the sleep issue, because what you're doing is every time you're drinking that much caffeine, you are basically putting last night's sleep on a credit card. And it's a cycle that you have to fix the day before your next day is any better. And unless you fix it the day before, tomorrow is going to be wrecked. And don't worry, man. You're 21. You'll figure this out.
You'll recover. I mean, your body's not. You're not alone. Your body.
You're not wrecking your body. You're just probably you're probably going to make yourself a little strung out.
But I would also say you're probably not enjoying the coffee much.
No.
Especially if you're popping pills for caffeine. I would just, maybe you keep it down to like 3 cups a day.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that's pot kettle black because I drink more than that.
Yeah, or like I said, like maybe one or 2 cups, and then switch to something a little lower key, right? And you got to be careful. I think our society, this is going to get probably beyond the scope of the show, but I think our society has gone a little freewheeling with sugars and the caffeines. Yeah. There's a million different types of energy drinks. I mean, I live in the Seattle area, right? This is the caffeine capital of the United States. We have literally coffee shops every 15 feet.
Sure.
It's ridiculous. And I think that, it's easy to overindulge in these kinds of things, but think of caffeine as any kind of mind-altering chemical, and just kind of take it easy. That's all you got.
It's important to remember that caffeine is in fact a drug, right?
Yeah.
It's
one that, like other drugs can be abused.
Right. I mean, enjoying a cup of coffee, enjoying a French press is okay, but if you're at this point where you're going through withdrawals or you're somehow jonesing for it, that's I would say. I mean, I don't know. I don't know, Chris. I wouldn't tell him to stop cold turkey because that's going to hurt, but I'd say certainly
just taper off a little bit.
Today drop the pills immediately.
And consider setting yourself a deadline and just accept, hey, you know what? So sometimes I know what happens, right, is you got so much work to do that you cannot, productively wise, afford to lose your evening work. However, just consider yourself taking a vacation for the next week after, the evenings. And, set a lower set of expectations for yourself for a couple of days, and it'll actually get better pretty quick. And if you get headaches, don't take Excedrin. Some Excedrin has caffeine in it. So be careful of that too. And there's a lot of stuff that has caffeine in it that you wouldn't expect either. So I know that I have a few family members who can't drink any caffeine, and every now and then they get a surprise. They have like a heart condition, and they get a little, I didn't know that was there, and they start to feel it. Speaking of that, I had my mom over this weekend, and she's never had an AeroPress style coffee. She's always just either done the drip or the K-cup thing more recently. She was amazed. I made her a cup of coffee. When I said, "Mom, you got to try this. You got to experience this." Because we've been getting so many great beans from our audience out there. It's like she's never had probably coffee of this quality, and she's never had it in this style. And so I made her a cup of coffee, and she just sipped on that for 2 hours. She said it was the best cup of coffee she'd ever had. So there you go. Because we're trying, those AeroPresses are cheap. I wish we still had the Amazon affiliates. I bet we'd be selling a whole bunch of those. Go figure. All right, well, Voldley writes in. He says, "Hi, Jar Jar and Chris." Oh, ouch. Jar Jar hasn't been around for a while, actually. Kind of miss him a little bit.
I'm sorry.
I know. He says, "Love the show, although he's kind of bored with the Microsoft topic." And I wanted to, so this is a thing about the Coder Radio program.
Yes.
Is as trends crop up in the industry, as events happen, the show sort of organically flows between topics, and occasionally, we are in a current of topics that some subset of the audience doesn't find interesting. However, another subset of the audience does find it interesting, and that's just sort of the nature of a weekly show like this. So, tablets has been a good example in the past, or mobile phones. I think that, I actually think we could do a whole nother episode. I on the Microsoft thing, I actually think it's of historical importance as far as the overall tech industry. Obviously, everybody's aware of Microsoft's role in the tech industry, and when you have a major change like this, and I've actually been thinking about the CEO change a lot more, and thinking about how long it took them to announce sort of a quote unquote obvious choice, and how really the best way to make these kind of announcements is, hey, Steve Ballmer is stepping down. Here's the new CEO. Right. And if you look at a lot of big companies, that's exactly how they do it. Let's just go back recently in time when Steve Jobs passed away. It wasn't now Apple will announce this 9-month long search. It was and Tim Cook is taking over. Or when Marissa Mayer took over at Yahoo, old CEO's out. Here's our new CEO, Marissa Mayer. Right. Or when Meg Whitman took over at HP, old CEO's out. Here's the new CEO. And it's much more planned, it's much more organized, it's much more thought through. This Microsoft thing, to me, now that I look back at it, really, if you look at the people who've been outed at Microsoft in the last 2 years, major executives, a lot of them responsible, I'm going to say it, a lot of them responsible for Windows 8. All right? Ballmer being one of them. They cleaned house over at Microsoft. That's what we just watched happen. And the way they did it was not clean, in the sense of well presented, well put together. It was, we're lopping off the head. We now have a lame duck in office while we go on this search trying to find everybody else we possibly can. And after 8-9 months, we're going to land on the guy that should have probably been the choice from the very beginning. And you remember Elop was leaking his plans for Microsoft about splitting the company up and all of these kinds of things. And then Mullally from Ford was so hotly suggested that he actually had to come out and say, "No, I'm not going to leave Ford." After he played duck for a while.
You heard the other rumor about Mullally, though, right before he bowed out.
The retirement thing, or what?
So the rumor is that Mullally was interested, but he had a couple conditions.
Oh.
2 of which were Ballmer and Gates leave the board.
Interesting.
And they contractually bind themselves to not interfere, even though they own, most of the company.
Well, I think Mullally was right.
He wanted a total free hand, and that just wasn't going to happen.
I don't know. I mean, gosh, it's really hard. So I see 2 Microsofts. I see the Microsoft that's here in Redmond, Washington, that has thousands of employees working on extremely cool stuff. And then I also see the Microsoft that always fails to execute at a large scale, for somehow, for being such a large company, understaffs big projects of massive importance, and is continually rife with internal politics and fiefdoms. And it's interesting to have such a two-sided company.
See, the thing is, I see two Microsofts too, but very different. I see the company that's interesting and is doing cool stuff. Then I see the company that's actually making money.
Hmm.
And I think picking Nadella is a firm step towards the time to make money, right? Let's focus on our core competencies.
Yeah. So what do the other thing is they just put a guy in charge of one of the world's largest companies and one of the most important tech companies in the world, and the man's never ran a company in his life. So in my opinion, Gates' new role is really about power for Gates and sort of being a puppet master of Nadella, at least for a couple of years. I mean, think about the responsibility of running. Is it safe to say the world's largest software company? I think it might be. I mean, Windows has what, 1.1 billion users?
Are they a software company now? I thought they were a device. Oh, that's mean.
Isn't it just kind of, it's very interesting the way this whole thing went down. And I think we don't see it all right now because we're in the forest, but when we're down the road a piece and we look back at all the trees, we'll see a few things that aren't quite right about this whole situation. That's all I wanted to say.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think Nadella himself has hinted to where he's going, whether somebody's pulling the strings or not. I mean, in his first address, he redefined the company's goal. They spent a year pushing this devices and services narrative, and he comes up and says, "Oh no, we're a software company."
Oh, he did. Oh, that's
Right.
interesting.
You should read his speech.
I will. That's interesting.
I mean, he is who he is. He's a very talented executive for software, and people have been reading all kinds of stupid crap into this that they're going to kill X, but they're not going to do anything like that.
No, I don't think so. I think that all plays into their existing strategy.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff that they have that isn't a household name that is incredibly popular in the enterprise, and also actually pretty good, right? Hyper-V.
Yeah, okay, I'll give you that. Yeah, Hyper-V is pretty
there
good.
are things they could be doing that may not be sexy to talk about over Thanksgiving dinner, but are software, that's the key, and are very, very best in breed for what they are, and also going to make them a lot of money. I mean, I'm not concerned. If anything, I think Nadella is the right choice. I'm just concerned about Lord Gates. I love Bill Gates, but I feel like even unless they reinvent a product category, I kind of think the mobile race has kind of already been run.
Right.
The personal computer race, I mean, Moore's law is already starting to break down in personal computers.
And cloud type services are so much easier to break into in the sense that they're abstracted. They're an API, they're a web service. It's much easier for somebody to innovate there and then for the next generation of applications just to be developed on it. Whereas a hardware software platform like Android, that's like now trying to break the Windows monopoly on the mobile market.
Well, Androids, I mean, I don't know if you put it in the show notes. By the way, guys, today is a Chris show. He did everything.
Oh.
But did you see the Google leaks about how they're controlling Android?
Yes, I did. Through the, even down to the, you must place the Google search bar right here at this location on the home screen, and all of these kinds of little, and this goes back, that leak was from Gingerbread era. So
yes.
Yeah. I look at that kind of thing, and don't you think though that Google kind of has to do that to deliver some sort of sense of similarity between Android devices? Otherwise, you would think who knows what these OEMs would do?
Well, I think it's the OEMs want to avoid the Windows situation with PCs, where every PC must have Windows and they're paying a royalty. And Google needs to somehow monetize without charging a royalty. So they're obviously pushing their services, but I think it's interesting that Google is effectively no longer going to try and make money on hardware, right? When I think that's a fair assumption.
Yeah, it sounds like the Nexus line's going away, and
Motorola just got sold.
Right.
Microsoft is now pitching itself as a software company. Are we just reverting back to where we were before? Where Apple's the only one who does the unified system?
I wouldn't count Surface out yet and things like that, and Xbox, but yeah.
I love my Surface. I mean, I think consoles are kind of different. I love my Surface, but it's a laptop replacement that's not that cheap.
Yeah, that's true.
Because you really need the Pro version.
Right, and you can get a Chromebook for cheaper.
Right.
Yeah, that's the hard part. All right, well, we're going to get to his Scala question here, but first, why don't I thank DigitalOcean, one of our sponsors for Coder Radio. What is DigitalOcean, son? How do you not know about this yet? DigitalOcean is simple cloud hosting dedicated to offering the most intuitive and easy way to spin up a cloud server, and that sentence says a lot. They really are. They have a whole droplet system that you can deploy onto a VPS at DigitalOcean, backed by an SSD drive and a terabyte of transfer if you get the $5 a month service. In fact, users can create a cloud server in as little as 55 seconds. And actually, I think 44 seconds is a Jupiter Broadcasting community record. Let me know if you can beat that. And with pricing plans starting at $5 a month for 512 megs of RAM, that 20 gigabyte SSD really makes a difference. A CPU and a terabyte of transfer, which is a very generous amount of... And by the way, I was trying out an app recently on my one of my DigitalOcean droplets, and I did a speed test. I was getting like 100 megabits. It was very fast transfer. So when you combine that with their high-end boxes, very high-end hardware, and the SSD drive, it really screams. DigitalOcean also has data center locations in New York, San Francisco, now Singapore, and Amsterdam. With their simple interface, intuitive control panel, and by the way, power users can replicate it on a larger scale with a straightforward API. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to get a $10 credit so that way you can try it out for 2 months if you get that $5 unit. Listeners of Coder Radio can get that $10 credit by using the promo code Coder Radio February. That's all one word, Coder Radio February. So go over to DigitalOcean, check them out. There's, you know what, you'll be surprised what you can do. BitTorrent sync server, Yassi search server, all kinds of, a directory server I've set up for some internal contacts here at Jupiter Broadcasting. We're hearing from people that set up mail servers. Mike's used it to test app deployment back end for a couple of years, a year now, a while now. And it's great for spinning up something you want to throw a couple of test users at. It's great for just permanent fixed infrastructure as well. That low run cost with that fixed cost, you know you're always going to pay $5 a month. And if you need more than that, you just up it to the next level. You're not going to get a surprise bill where all of a sudden you've used a ton of bandwidth and you didn't know you were using that much bandwidth. It's terabyte. It's 1 terabyte. It's a fixed cost. You need more than that, you go get to the next plan. It's great for developers. In that sense, you always exactly know what you should be budgeting. It's great for guys like me who need a back-end infrastructure for our media services, and I need to be able to have a fixed set of costs. It's also fantastic because I can experiment with things and utilize their backup and snapshot system. They have a one-click application install. You can deploy a WordPress or LAMP stack from one of their droplets in seconds. They have droplets pre-configured with Docker, so if you're using the excellent Docker system that we've talked about, you're ready to go. They have a very active development community around Node.js, Rails, PHP, Linux, and all of those things, and they utilize some really awesome Linux technologies. Like KVM, just as an example. So go over to DigitalOcean.com, use the promo code Coder Radio February when you check out. See what I've been talking about, why I've been so happy with DigitalOcean. They got a video right there on their page. It explains a little bit more. 1.1 million cloud servers. Now that's some serious, serious infrastructure. So a big thank you to DigitalOcean for sponsoring the Coder Radio program. Go use that promo code, Coder Radio February. Man, 2 months, why not? You get 2 months for free. All right, so getting back to Voldy's question here, he was asking what, if any thoughts you have at this point about using Scala and what your experience was. He says he wanted to learn a functional programming for quite some time and decided to learn Clojure, and it's amazing. The way of managing state is fabulous, but he wanted to hear your thoughts on Scala. Do you have thoughts on Scala?
Kind of. I keep peeking in and out of the Scala world.
Taking a look. Yeah, I see it's over there.
So one of the things about Scala is it tries to be non-threatening, where it really wants you to be an functional kind of language, but it allows a lot of the OO stuff. And I have a nasty habit of just writing Scala that wants to be Java.
Yeah.
So I want to be a Scala developer. I definitely want to do that. I just keep not.
Yeah, I know how that goes.
I mean, I would say, Scala is definitely a low barrier to entry for functional programming. But the issue is that it is a low barrier to entry, and it allows you to keep doing things the OO way, which can be, yeah.
Clojure, I guess. All right, well, Garrett wrote in this one. I just got to kick around a little bit with you. So he says here's an article about your favorite subject. I'm not sure I agree, but the author argues that technical debt is not necessarily a bad thing. And here's essentially what his argument breaks down to. The author says that it's important to be clear that writing bad code is very different from acquiring technical debt. If you can't refactor your software because it's poorly architected or poorly written, you don't have technical debt, you have bad software. All right, so that's an interesting point. He goes on to say, it's very easy to fall victim to the thinking that debt is always a bad thing. But that's not always the case. Debts are a trade-off, and smart borrowers understand that long-term benefits often outweigh the costs of a college A college degree can help a person earn enough money that's going into debt, you can make it up. It makes sense. Similarly, technical debt is something that developers should knowingly take on in order to improve their product in the long term. When he was originally describing the metaphor to his boss, Ward says, I thought borrowing money was a good idea. I thought rushing software out the door to get some experience with it was a good idea. So he says also that it's kind of a natural occurrence of software development. I want to touch on the technical debt is not always a bad thing concept, because I harp on technical debt a lot on this show, but I realized in reality, I have come into client situations and I've evaluated the situation and looked at their technical debt and thought, it's probably easier or more efficient to just keep this system running than to replace this system. And, really had to give that some thought, because there is some downsides to that, especially if things are a little wonky, not exactly stable. Have you ever run into this where you're like, I'm not even going to bother replacing it. I instead will spend the time, which is more of a long-term cost, right? Because I'm going to be spending that time in little bits and pieces for years instead of spending a month or two replacing it all up front. Have you ever run into this where you've decided to just bite the bullet?
Okay, so in that case, technical debt's still a bad thing. It's just less painful to ignore it than to actually address it.
Right, but then doesn't that kind of mean it's a good thing? Like, if it's less work and less effort to just continue to address it over the long haul, isn't that a win?
I would say no, because if there's ever a case where you need to address it immediately, you're going to come to a grinding halt.
That's true. It could bite you, especially and sometimes compound issues too.
I mean, I guess I didn't read the full article. I'm just hearing about it now. I could see certainly a religious adherence to doing everything the right way.
Going too far.
It's too far. But I don't know any developers who do that, right? Yeah. I guess, sure, you could, I'll give you an example, to psychotically avoid making some sort of singleton or global because it's a bad thing to do. Okay, well, that might cost you another 4 hours today, where if you just temporarily use the global or a singleton, you would be fine. And then you can go back and get rid of it later. Yeah, then in that case, sure, the technical debt's a good trade.
I think it's wasted effort.
I would say, yeah. I mean, I guess it's a spectrum, but there's...
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's a spectrum, and you just kind of have to make the call at the time.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the longer something stays in the code base, though, the more bit rot you're going to get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the other thing you have to remember, too, is you might not always be the steward of that thing, and so that means if you don't fix it, the next person that comes after you might have to fix it, and they might have a larger problem on their hands at that point.
Right.
So, yeah. But I have been one to say, let's just keep the debt, and I actually kind of have regretted it almost every time. Now that I think about it.
There's that too.
Yeah. All right, well, Kevin writes in, and he says, hey, Go to Radio. Hey, Kevin. I have some questions for you, both of you, regarding the healthy time frame for receiving a deposit on a project and then starting it. Usually, when I start a large project for a client, I get half of the amount up front and the other half when I complete. I assume this is standard and how Michael does it himself with his clients. Recently, I agreed to a project for a client, and the manager assured me that a payment was on the way and to start the project anyways. Typically, I wait for the deposit before starting, but this time was not on my side, and I completed more than half of the code while the payment was in transit. Fast forward a week, no payment. I talked to the manager multiple times, and he kept telling me that the payment was sent and started giving me arbitrary check numbers. On top of that, I told him that I ceased work on the project once a week went by and there was no payment. He started to yell at me on the phone because I was somehow making him look bad, and it was a big mistake for me to stop working on it. Fast forward 2 weeks since the original statement date, and I finally received the payment. The client lost a week of me working on it, but I had to stick to my guns no matter how much pressure I received from the manager and his employees. My family and close friends said that it was the right thing to cease work, and the manager was in the wrong for stiffing me. So in summary, was it wrong to start a project before the initial deposit, or is it pretty common to get started either way? From your experiences, what is a good buffer for waiting for a deposit before getting started? My current project is learning experience, is a learning experience, and hopefully down the road I can find better clients who are willing to pay on time. Thanks, Kevin. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, so generally I don't do half up, half down. I do milestone billing, but with that first deposit is usually paid up front, and you pay for a sprint before the sprint happens.
What happens if they don't pay?
Well, then we just stop, and if they don't pay for a certain amount of time, there's a clause in the contract that it's canceled.
Yeah.
I will say that there have been clients who reject that, and you end up making different terms with. But it's very important to have some sort of stopgap, where if an invoice is late by a certain amount of time, the project is killed.
A week? What do you think of a week?
I actually do. So the way I'm doing it now is, if the invoice is late by a day, it adds 4 days to the project timeline.
Wow.
Yeah. The reason for this is, and I think the writer, when he starts freelancing long enough, clients are always going to try, and the clients who are the smallest and don't necessarily pay on time are also the ones who are more likely to want to sue you, especially if they're not paying you on time resulted in their project somehow being late and causing them an issue. So it's super important that you have something in there that if it's late, it kills the contract. Now, obviously, this is one of those things where I waive it 99% of the time. I think I've only actually enforced it once.
I'm wondering if, I bet you Kevin doesn't even have a contract. It's just kind of a learning experience, and it's a handshake and a thank you.
Yeah, that's not good. I mean, I don't know where Kevin's based out of, but in the U.S., particularly with a bad economy, anybody can sue anybody for anything here.
Mm-hmm.
And you not necessarily getting paid on time doesn't mean you get to cancel the contract if your contract doesn't state that.
Yeah, I'm surprised that the manager reacted like that. That seems pretty fair to me.
I'm not surprised at all, actually.
Yeah, I'm not either.
Because most of my clients, and I can tell you exactly what happened. The manager probably isn't a bad guy. They're probably using like a payment service like ADP or Chase Payments. And there's about 2 to 3 weeks lead time on them sending the request and Chase getting you a check.
Mm-hmm.
So they could send the request on a Monday and say, okay, you're good to start Wednesday. But that's just not realistic on their part. But if they're using this payment service, they should know that. I mean, the fact that it's a surprise that it took 2 weeks is weird to him. Weird.
Yeah, and the fact that it took 2 weeks makes it sound like they didn't really get to it till he made a stink.
I've had these payment services take a while.
Yeah, well, if it's a big enough company too, you can have like just political internal bureaucracy that makes things take longer. You submit a request to the department that handles payments, and then it depends on the company, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's very important to have a contract. It's very important if you're using a client contract, the project not be super large.
Also, what about, maybe for smaller just training experiences, what about billing hourly?
I actually don't like hourly billing.
Yeah.
I feel like hourly billing is not ideal for a lot of reasons.
For one, it's sort of for the person that's hiring the contractor, it sort of puts you at a disadvantage because that contractor makes more money if they take longer.
Yeah.
There's that. And also, if you're really good, you don't get paid your value because you got it done really fast. And if you say you have a library of existing code that you could utilize for this project, and so you saved a bunch of time, well, you're still using your highly valuable quote-unquote product to make that thing for them. Just because it took you 3 hours or 4 hours or 2 days less time doesn't make that less valuable.
And also hourly billing, at least the way I used to do it, requires a lot of paperwork, a lot of record keeping.
Yes, that too.
Yeah, because
you got to give detailed notes on what every hour was spent doing.
It's unfortunate, but you kind of, if you're going to be a freelancer full time, you have to assume that every client's a scumbag and is going to not want to pay you. You have to keep those records to be ready for a dispute.
Yeah, everybody has their own best interests. It's not even like an evil thing. It's just human nature.
No, it's not a negative thing, but if I know some folks I work with around here are a little liberal on the way they track hours. They don't add hours, but they don't take detailed notes, right?
Yeah.
And I've kind of talked to them. I'm saying, if I was your client and I didn't want to pay you, you showed me this, I wouldn't have to pay you. Because the way court works, it almost always in favor of the client.
Ickmeyer points out in the chat room, this even applies to his photography business. He says he thought about hourly billing for photography, and the math just doesn't work. In that case, they're buying a product, not time. It's really difficult when doing a product as opposed to a service. Very true. Yeah. Good luck, Kevin.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like this might be your first freelance gig. Unfortunately, being a good developer is maybe 15% of what you're doing, and the rest of it is avoiding legal issues and accounting issues.
Sounds like he's doing it the right way, though, by learning this stuff with the right
small project. Yeah, I mean, even if this guy stiffs you, which to be honest, it does happen. People pay me late. People, sometimes it takes months to get paid.
Lampy says in the chat room, if you think freelancing is only coding, you better get a day job. People hate it when we talk about the contract stuff. I got an email. He said, I don't like it when you talk about the client stuff. But let me tell you something. This is going to be more and more the reality that developers face. This is going to be it, you guys. You're going to have to go out and do this yourselves at a certain point for a lot of you. Not all of you, but a lot of you. Welcome to the new economy, everyone. Welcome. Enjoy your stay. Try not to go crazy.
It's unfortunately, and this might just be me, but when I approach a contract, you just have to figure, is this contract big enough that if it fell apart, would it be an issue?
Right. Oh, man. Yeah. You don't want to be a too big to fail contract.
Right. I mean, my experience, I don't know, Chris, if this is yours, the smaller the client, the more of a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
And the bigger the client, usually the slower they are to pay you.
Yeah. And it is really hard to strike that balance.
Right.
Yeah. I totally agree.
Yeah, I mean, I would say use this as a learning experience, but you're going to need to probably get a contract, and in cases where they want to use their contract, prepare for a week or two of back and forth with their lawyer about clauses in the contract. Because I can tell you, every time a client's handed me a contract, there are 3 or 4 clauses I've had to insist that they strike or walk away.
Do they act surprised? Like, you have an issue? Everybody just accepts this.
Every time.
Yeah, everybody just signs this. What's your problem?
Yeah.
I've heard that story a couple of times. All right, well, Scott writes in, a lot of people liked episode 86, the, what was it, the mythology of methodology.
Right.
He says, hi, Mike and Chris, this is Scott. I listen to Coder Radio every week, and I really like the developer-focused topics you cover. I'm a 33-year-old computer science student going back to school to become a developer. Your talk about learning version control hit home. I dig the theory that I am learning, but I want to get paid to develop software. What are some resources I can use to learn about version control, Git, SVG, etc.?
Yeah, actually, so Code School has I believe it's still free, Git course.
Oh, yeah, let me go check that. And we have an affiliate with Code School at the bottom of our website. That's a great idea.
And I've been told it's fairly good.
I'm going there right now. Let's see.
Let me see. Git, here it is. Yep.
They still have it?
Git Basics, yeah. Try Git is the free one. Then they have actually several Git courses.
Courses, okay, they're courses. Yeah. I recall this now. Very good. So there you go. That's probably the best way to start out. And I think, like Mike said, some of them are free. So go to the courses, all courses, and then scroll down there until you find the Get Real.
And then there's also a book that's actually available online called Pro Git.
Yeah, here we go.
That I read. And it's a little thick, but fairly good. I'll link it in the chat.
So if you try that out, do us a favor and click that affiliate link at the bottom of the site first before you visit, and then we get like $15 or something. I don't remember. I know, it's crazy. Good luck, Scott. Good luck. All right, so we've got one more email to get to. It's Karim, and he writes in. He says, hi, Mike and Chris. Whoa, what a show, episode 86. Another Love at 86 episode.
I know.
Wow, check that out. He says, Mike got the pronunciation of my name correct. I'm sure I just butchered it. Here's a background followed by an update. Background, I'm a full-time .NET developer working for a software company in Nashville, Tennessee that centers to the banking industry. Caters to the banking industry. I've been a .NET developer since I first started programming while I was still in college in April 2006. I'm a 29-year-old male, married, of an East Indian origin, living in the USA. Well, look at this. We know everything about him now. I sometimes take projects on the side if I can dedicate enough time to them and find them interesting enough. Even though I work on Microsoft technologies for my day job, I'm a Linux user at heart. I live the Linux lifestyle. Even the projects that I work on the side, I do development on my Linux laptop. No VMs, no wine, no second Windows computer. Like a project I worked on for the internet security startup to help create a secure browser using the Qt framework, or the ASP.NET MVC app I created for a wholesale jewelry repair shop to validate the filter data coming out of their legacy invoicing system. Yep, I did manage. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. It's getting long here. He says, oh, by the way, he says that he loved Mono, by the way. So the guest was to find a replacement for ASP.NET for my. So the quest was to find a replacement for ASP.NET for my personal hobby project as well as a side project. That's when I decided to send an email to the show, which I'm so glad I got the discussion going. Even though the email was geared towards Mike, I was glad to find that Chris was able to resonate with my issue. When you love Linux as much as I do, but can't switch your entire workflow to it, it's very heartbreaking and frustrating. In my case, I couldn't continue with Linux if I wanted to stay with .NET. It was a clear choice that was already made. I just needed to find an alternative to .NET now. He says, I took a look at the Play framework, and I have to say I was impressed. That would be an understatement. There's certainly a learning curve, and I acknowledge that, but I do see potential that Mike has mentioned time and time again on the show. Qt for the desktop and mobile Play for the web. Thanks again for the great discussion. Thanks to Mike for the DigitalOcean, and now Play. You have excellent recommendations. So look at that. You just switched another guy over to Java Play.
Woot!
Those guys going to cut you a check?
Yeah, I don't even know who started that project, actually.
Yeah, but we've gotten a few emails. People are loving it.
It's funny because when I first mentioned it, a lot of folks were skeptical. It was at the height of the, quote, Java hacks.
Yeah, that's right.
And, remember all the crap emails we were getting. People, oh, you shouldn't be doing Java. And now I'm just, you guys see, a nice sip of Java makes your day better.
You know what? I think you totally called it. I
don't know. He mentioned RavenDB in his email. We have a special guest coming in a few weeks.
Get it out of here.
Really?
That Chris Fisher does not know about yet because I forgot to forward the email to you.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. Well, all right. I want to thank GoDaddy.com, another fantastic sponsor of the Coder Radio program. And guess what? Good news. The 295.com is back. If you've been considering grabbing a .com for a future project, if you have something you want forwarded, anything like that, I've been using these. I just grabbed myself a couple of .coms because it's $2.95. It's cheaper than some apps. Just use the promo code 295coder when you check out. I also say, if you're working with a team, you got a group of people, 1 to a dozen or more, GoDaddy is excellent with their shared admin control panel. You can set good permissions so you don't have to share passwords. If you work with clients, this is what you need to do. You need to do this so that way you don't have to log in as them. And then if something ever happens, they can't blame you because you're logging in with your own account, your own credentials, keeping it secure. You can transfer it when they get a web guy, whatever you need to do. It's really handy. And now for $2.95, why not go grab you something you've been waiting for? So go over to GoDaddy.com, use the promo code 295coder. Find out why they have more than 12 million customers, and they're the world's #1 domain name registrar with more than 57 million domains under management over at GoDaddy.com. Plus, they have that award-winning 24/7 support. So go check them out. Go to GoDaddy.com. Use the promo code 295coder to get that .com. They also have all kinds of other great services like a brand new WordPress hosting, Office 365, all of that stuff. You can also use the promo code 30deal2 if you're not getting a .com. 30deal2 to take 30% off anything in your shopping cart that's new. So go over to GoDaddy.com. Use the promo code CODER. No, I'm sorry, 295coder. 295coder over at GoDaddy.com. And a big thank you to GoDaddy for sponsoring the Coder Radio program. All right, Mr. Dominic. So I wanted to talk to you today. You remember a couple of weeks ago, or 2 weeks ago. Yeah, it was 2 weeks ago. I discussed this issue that came up where the Linux Action Show covered a story from the mailing list on the KDE project, and there was a couple of details that were wrong, and I felt really bad about it, and we were getting some heat for it from the KDE group. And at the time, I thought, I should have done a better job, and there's probably a better way for them to communicate and publicly big-ticket items that the quote-unquote press has an interest in. Well, this morning, this issue came up again. Martin went to Google+. Now, Martin is the maintainer of Kwin, and he's a really fantastic developer. He says, once again, I'm upset by the media reporting about discussions on a mailing list and reporting incorrect information in an extremely tabloid style. And he is referring to a post at Phoronix about the shuttering of a major component of the KDE desktop. So, here we are. 2 weeks later, and we have another miscommunication where an open community, and you've talked about that tool recently too, where you have your development out in the open. I can't remember what that tool was called, but I want to circle back to that in a second. where you have, because of the type of development work being done, open source development, and the type of collaboration that they have used for years, mailing lists, and the fact that those are archived online in HTML format for anyone to view, they keep running into this problem where people are going in there, pulling out little bits of juicy details, and then reporting on them as fact when they are sometimes just discussions around what to do with this piece of code. And I want to look at this problem and sort of zoom out at a larger 50-foot view and talk about how developers, especially small developers or even maybe large companies who have an active community around their product or work with a product that has an active community, how they can maybe better set expectations and communicate and discuss and maybe even launch their products more successfully. Because I think also I think we could have an interesting discussion around how to properly make a splash and how sometimes that approach can take different paths. I'll give you an example. So this Sunday on the Linux Action Show, we technically launched 2 products. We launched a new shirt and logo, and we didn't say anything about it until it was available for purchase at that moment. And the moment we talked about it, people could go to teespring.com/last300 and buy themselves a shirt. We also announced a new show. If you think of that in the terms of a product, we announced a new product that isn't ready yet. It's not shipping till March, but we announced it yesterday. 2 very different approaches for 2 very different types of things. And I think you can look at software in the same way. Sometimes there's an advantage to not saying anything until it's ready for purchase, and sometimes there's an advantage to getting people stoked over a couple of period of weeks to help them generate some buzz, to help get their feedback and input. And I think we could talk a little bit about where those 2 things would be more appropriate. And the reason why I want to talk about this a little bit is there's also the angle of once you launch something and it gets some negative feedback, like maybe somebody goes to Google Plus and starts just talking trash about you or the product, there's a certain way you have to respond to that, and you have to remember that your response to that will always be forever available in a Google search. And this is something where, when you're working on a project, you're really passionate about it, it's really close to you, and sometimes it can be really hard to take that criticism in and not sort of lash out and respond with an attack, which then gets documented on the web for everyone to see. So I got a whole range of stuff I wanted to talk about. So should we start with maybe better ways for developers to communicate with their user base? Are you
Yeah,
down? Okay.
For sure. Sorry, I was coughing while you were talking.
It's okay. No, I know. I was doing that last week. So let's talk about this KDE thing a little bit. So they just again got burned by somebody running a story on their mailing list. You were just recently talking about a tool that could bring development out into the open a little bit, although it might be a better tool than a mailing list. What do you think about? Is this a problem that is inherent to open source development? And do you think it's a bad thing?
So I think there's 2 problems here. Certainly the mail list thing is inherent to open source. But, the tool I mentioned last week was called Trello. And they are a proprietary, they're a web product, so I know that's a whole weird thing, but they do their development in the open on their own tool, which is, just as an aside, the ultimate form of dog fooding, right? And they don't seem to have such a problem with it, even though people are constantly opening, tickets and trying to get them to add things. They have moderators who are kind of dedicated to just gracefully interacting with their community, their user base, and handling the situation. So I guess if you're going to have something as open as that, which I would say mailing list is just as open, if not more open, maybe you do need someone who, obviously this is open source, this is volunteer, but who just takes, instead of coding for that extra hour a week, kind of tries to frame things for the media and the wider community, because if a reporter is misunderstanding it, surely a junior developer looking at this stuff might be a little confused too.
Sure. And, recently Debian's been going through a bunch of internal decisions, I guess you could say. And it got to the point where what Martin's complaining about is Phoronix running a story, but it really got to the point with this Debian debacle where every single person on Reddit became a reporter and was posting threads, hundreds of comments deep, posting it to Twitter, and really people became like social media reporters in a sense, and were quote unquote breaking stories that had no context. All of these kinds of things that reporters are supposed to add weren't there. And to me, it starts to create this snowball effect where you can be at the center of it and it just completely gets away from you and it goes on to its own life of its own. which you have no, there's really nothing you can do to sort of correct that ship because it's moving so fast and in such a certain direction that you're just kind of screwed at that point. Like by the time it breaks and starts rolling, it's too late in a way. You almost need to be able to set the tone before anybody's talking about it. And I just think there's just no way for these open source projects to handle this without, like you're saying, have an alternative location for this information. And I think people really need to consider that if they're working on something that a lot of eyes are going to be on, they're going to have to deal with the unfortunate reality that in a Twitter, Google+, Reddit world, Hacker News, this kind of stuff has to be thought about. And that's, I wish there was an alternative point of view on this because I can't think of one. So if you guys have one out there, email it into us. Go over to Jupiter Broadcasting, hit the contact link. But to me, this seems like just going to be part of the burden of having an open source project out in the public, if you want to call it that. And I think
I would say even if you're not open source, though, not to interrupt, but given just the prevalence of social media, even with the proprietary projects, you're not going to be able to control the conversation anymore. It's just not possible, right?
Yeah.
Let's look at a perfect example. I mean, how many times, particularly last year, did I have to come on and say, "Hey, GitHub was down last night, so CodeJournal didn't work."
Right.
Unfortunately, there were folks on the App Store ripping me apart.
Right. Yeah. Well, recently there was things being said on Reddit and G+ about me and the Linux Action Show, etc. That not only was the entire premise of the conversation skewed in one direction that was false, but then a lot of assumptions were made that were completely false. And I just decided, I could sit there and I could fight every single one of those, and I could respond to everyone and tell them, no, this is technically wrong. Here's the accurate information. At the end of the day, I guess here's my alternative point on where Martin's at, is at the end of the day, I felt like I should allow my product to do the talking for me. Every time I release something, every time I release an episode, every time I record an episode, that's my statement, right? That's my response, is the actual work itself. And if people see the value in that work and they see the truth in that work, that's all the answer they need. And I didn't feel like I needed to get actively engaged in this conversation because it was a conversation by people who had an agenda and being discussed amongst people who had no information. And to me, I just didn't see the benefit in that. And I can see how that could also happen to a closed source or open source project. Like, there's the people just start to make assumptions. There can be a large discussion. The problem is that stuff does last forever. So there is damage done.
Yeah.
And it's just how do you, where do you draw the line to decide to actively engage versus sitting on the sidelines and letting the talking heads talk it out and let it fade away. And that's a really hard thing to sort of, zero in on. Have you ever had to sort of bite that?
I had early on when CodeJournal was launched, like 3 months later, a bunch of news outlets promoted another app saying it was the first to interact with GitHub, and I was super pissed off.
I remember that. That was so ridiculous.
And I tried to write the journalist, but I kind of got told to go bang off, or only one responded. He apologized and said he would put a tweet saying it's actually not the first, just the first from a quote, well-known developer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, okay, so you only promote apps of people you're personal friends with. I'm like, I'm cool with that. I'm actually fine with that. It's just, if you're going to say something's the first in its category, at least search the App Store.
Yeah, it is interesting how stories will take a life of their own, and there's not a lot of critical thought given to them. Like, it really didn't take much work to figure out that wasn't the first GitHub client. That, it really, a lot of times I find these stories or these threads are people are almost just doing it for their own amusement. It's like a form. It's like it's a new media form of entertainment, in a sense, because there's really no effort spent in making correct statements or fact checking. There's like a little fact checking would go a long way in some of these cases, right?
The situation I just mentioned, it's a case of, it's really easy to promote an app made by your friend.
Yeah.
In the case of the KDE thing, I think it's a little hard for them to complain, though, because, these conversations are public in the mailing list.
Right.
So why... I get what they're saying. I guess it is the same complaint. You wish the person reporting on it had just done a quick search.
Right.
But mean, what I found is you just can't expect, quote, journalists to do that anymore. Because, frankly, a lot of these pundits aren't journalists, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not a journalist. I can tell you most other podcasts, at least when they're in their podcasting capacity, are not journalists, right?
Right.
I mean, the people just aren't doing the research. And I have nothing against Phoronix. I read Phoronix, but I consider Phoronix an entertainment site, not really a news site. So I found their reporting to sometimes be
hit and miss.
Right. I take it with a grain of salt. I'm not saying they're always wrong.
Yeah, that's what okay, so let's flip this. Maybe, are you suggesting that perhaps the responsibility doesn't lie with the project itself to sort of step up its PR game, but maybe the responsibility lies with the users to be able to suss out and take things with a grain of salt?
So it's the consumer of the media, right? It's like, if you're listening to, I'll give you an example. For Linux news, then I'm going to butter up Chris here, people.
Ooh, okay.
LAS is my general source. If I hear it on LAS, I don't check it. I assume it's true.
Holy crap.
But there's other Linux shows that I listen to that are a little more, I consider, entertainment based. And
yeah, okay, I can dig that.
Right. Coda Radio, not really a news show, right? It's by definition a talk show.
Right.
So you're probably not going to use this as your basis for any large business decisions or changes made on technology.
Right.
But there are some sites that I do consider more reputable news sites. Unfortunately, I can't think of any off the top of my head, so maybe there's not.
It's getting worse, yeah. And
it is getting worse.
I think that underscores your take it with a pinch of salt approach, right? And I think, too, this applies to all types of software projects. Like, I'll give you an example of something that's super hot right now, is everybody loves to pile on Apple when they kick an app from the App Store. And they've recently been cleaning house on not all, but I think 3 or 4 pretty well-known Bitcoin apps. Not all Bitcoin apps, but 3 or 4 pretty well-known ones. Now, Apple, being Apple, doesn't make a public statement as to why. In fact, they even give the developers themselves often very little information. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So what's the rest of the internet do, right? They got pitchforks, they've got their torches, they've got their ammo, their guns, and they're literally destroying Apple products and uploading the video of it to YouTube to make a statement. They're blowing up MacBooks, they're shooting iPhones. Seems so wasteful. Maybe Apple is just being a dick because they want to implement their own payment system and they don't want to have competition in the App Store. Or maybe those apps violated an App Store policy that they then found out about and kicked them, right? And so, and by the way, some of those apps have been reaccepted, but nobody covers that, right? It's not a big S storm when the app's re-added to the App Store after the developer fixes the thing they were supposed to fix. And Google kicks crap too, but we don't also get the same pitchforks. So it's this lack of analytical thought when you read something online, even though we all know the internet's full of crap and there's tons of misinformation posted every single day, multiple times a day. Yet still, if people see, what part of it is, I think? Part of it is brand trust. If people see a name that they think they trust or know, and that name or brand is saying it, it's like it like bypasses the analytical filters in their mind and goes right to the fact section of their mind. And they just immediately assume it's true, without actually giving it the full due as if it was coming from somebody or someplace they'd never heard of before. And so I agree with you that I think some of the blame goes on ourselves for not thinking analytically and critically about every bit of information we take in. And like this whole, I don't like Apple pulling Bitcoin apps from the App Store. But at the same time, I'm willing to give it a week or two to learn more information to find out what the hell was actually going on before I load my gun and go shoot an iPhone, right? I agree. It's like what Nefarious Beard is saying. Brand trust is almost equivalent to tribalism or brand feudalism. And that is very, very true. And this recent dust-up about LAS and Jupiter Broadcasting, it was the same thing. There was mistaken and misplaced brand trust in the person saying the things, and so everyone assumed that everything the person was saying was likely true, when it was actually all wrong. And this sort of just snowballed because everybody just assumes, well, if the basic information is true, this is outrageous. And this iPhone example is a great thing, and there's a lot, or GitHub being down. Everybody, if one person's posting in the comments, well, GitHub's down, then a whole bunch of other people will pile on, assuming it must be not GitHub's fault, but the app's fault. it's a real problem, and people do need to get their crap together. And I think it is interesting that social media does allow for the other voice to respond. Like Martin has gone to Google Plus now on a couple occasions and said this is inaccurate, trying to maybe encourage people to think more critically. But that is a drop in an overall torrent of information that people are now spreading around about that project, essentially saying that the search component to the KDE desktop is dead, right? And now that's on Reddit, that's on Twitter, that's on Hacker News. I read it this morning on Hacker News. Right? It's all over the web. It's not true. And
Right.
his one post at Google Plus is not correcting that tidal wave of information.
Yeah, I just don't see a way to solve this problem for them without, closing up the mailing list or something equally distasteful.
Yeah, that's not really an ideal solution. So I think this extends to launch day. How have you found to communicate the release of a project or a product you're working on? Do you try to go the total surprise route? Do you do the pre-announce thing? What's been the strongest success for you?
Well, the strongest success was definitely a total surprise, but that was because it wasn't. I think once you've had a product be successful, it's different. But the first one is going to be a total surprise because even if you pre-announce it, no one's going to hear you.
Okay.
A lot of the times, I'm finding it doesn't matter though. You're never going to. Either way can work if the product is good and if you're not competing in a crowded category. I don't think in the future, I don't know that I would necessarily do a total surprise route for something large.
Okay.
Certainly for something web-based, I'd probably want to do a kind of like a beta system. For an app, total surprise is nice, but the problem with total surprise, you really need a lot of downloads in those first 2 weeks to climb the charts.
Right. And so if you kind of prepare people, they can get a little organized about that.
Right.
And maybe everybody goes and downloads and rates it around the same time. And it helps it in the discoverability in the app stores or wherever, podcast directory or whatever it is. Yeah. That's essentially where I've fallen down too, is like, it does depend on the product, and it does depend on what your reach is. All these things you have to take into consideration. And the other thing you can kind of do is if it's something that you think will grab press attention, you could send out beta or demo copies and say, hey, could you, this is under embargo. Would you be willing to write something about it on this date? And then you announce it then to sort of a big splash. But that is so hard to pull off. And you don't know if those people are going to write about it. You don't know how that's going to go. But I look at so many great things that people in our community have made that just don't get a lot of traction, not because they're not good, but because nobody knows about them. And I wonder, too, I wonder why more podcast listeners aren't advertising in podcasts, because a podcast advertisement offers a huge return for a very reasonable investment, and they're massively underutilized for developers. Like, I feel like podcast and developers are should be joined at the hip. And every time I've heard an app advertised on a podcast, I've always I've always gone and checked it out, and it seems to do well for them, especially if it's the right match to the audience.
Yeah, I will say I've listened to a number of podcasts that do have developers advertising apps. Unfortunately, the ones I'm thinking of, you can tell if they are interested in the app or not when they read the ad. So I could definitely see having some apprehension.
Yeah, apprehension.
Yes.
Oh man, that's good.
In terms of, I have looked into the advertising apps on podcasting things. It's very, very hard to do if you don't know how the person's going to read it. And I'll give you, I don't want to give specific examples, but there are certain podcast hosts who perhaps you can tell in their advertisements when they're more or less genuine or not.
Right. Yep. It's true.
So in a way, you could get negative advertising.
Yeah. So my advice in that scenario would be, you have to be smart about who you target and make sure they're the right match. And that podcaster probably shouldn't be taking on things they don't actually have an interest in. That's kind of their bad too. But that's...
And then, of course, it has to be the right podcast, right? You wouldn't target Last with a Mac app.
Right. Right.
Although you might target last with the Windows 8 app because everybody loves Windows 8.
Of course. We're all closet Windows 8 lovers, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's true. All right. Well, I just wanted to bounce around with you a couple of things of my recent observations on my latest go around of bullcrap on social media and how I tried to deal with it. And the reason why I want to relate this to developers is because eventually, your app is going to crash or your website's going to be down and you're going to get S about it and people are going to get a lot madder than you expect. And this is something I want to talk about because you will be surprised at how angry the masses can get for something you're either giving them for free or something that's an incredible value. But first, I want to talk about another credible value, and that is Ting.com. Ting is mobile that makes sense. My mobile service provider for over a year now, and boy, I could not be happier because Ting just lowered their data rates, and they're even more reasonable now. So go over to coderradio.ting.com. That lets Ting know you heard about it here on this show. We appreciate you just visiting the site, checking out their savings calculator, seeing what you could save. All of that is just your way of telling Ting, thank you very much for supporting the Coder Radio program and keeping those guys going. And you can check out their offerings because while you're there, dig around the site a little bit. Take a look at some of their blog posts, for example, where they have recently outlined some of the new devices coming to the Ting network, the HTC One Mini, Max. Also, the LG Rumor Touch refurb is at an incredible value right now, less than $40 for a fully refurbished unit. $40 for a cell phone with no contract, no early termination fee, and you only pay for what you use. They've also got the Sanyo Miro now, which is a really nice feature phone with an OLED screen on the front. They're getting the Samsung Galaxy S3 refurb. You're going to be able to get you own this phone outright. You're not amortizing the cost over 2 years. You're not paying into something that's completely not worth it by the end of that 2 years. You own it outright, all yours, only pay for what you use service, $300. They're also getting the LG G Flex and the tri-band Samsung Galaxy S4. Yeah, Ting supports tri-band LTE. They got a post about that too if you're curious about tri-band LTE and the benefits of it. Ting is a fantastic company, and you can bring your own device if you've already got one that's compatible with the Sprint network. This is great. This is why you want to go to coderradio.ting.com because they're going to take $25 off your first device if you don't have one yet. If you already have a device, like they recently just added support for the iPhone 4 and 4S, bring that device with you. They'll take $25 off your first month of service. They've got a fantastic page all about BYOD, what devices you can bring. You can also sell your old device if you're switching over to Ting and turn that old device into some cash. That helps with that move as well. And Ting has an early termination relief program. You can find that at ting.com/ETF. That'll take up to $75 off each line you need to cancel. Then you're on a Ting plan. 98% of people would save money with Ting. Check this out. This next number has been validated by 2 independent sources. 100% of small businesses with 10 or more mobile phones would save money by switching to Ting. Every Ting plan includes hotspot and tethering, caller ID, voice messaging, picture messaging, etc. It's all included for a flat $6. $6 a month. That's all you pay, plus taxes and then your usage. So straightforward. Ting takes your minutes, your messages, and your megabytes. They add them all up at the end of the month. Whatever bucket you fall into, that's what you pay. They got a great video you can go watch on their website about that and go check out these guys. I'm telling you, I've been paying now for 2 lines. I've got the HTC One and the Nexus 5. If you're a developer and you end up with multiple Android devices for unit testing, if you need to try out different devices like older devices, I also have an Evo 4G that I turn on from time to time to try out some of the JB apps. This is a no-brainer. This is the best way to try out multiple devices in real-world conditions, not on Wi-Fi, and you only pay for it when you use it. And then, so what I do, Nexus 5 is my daily driver. That's my favorite phone right now. I love the thinness, the weight. I love the wireless charging. It's got a great screen. The battery life is fantastic. But the HTC One is a Cadillac, my friends. The HTC One is one of the finest phones made recently. And so every now and then I want to be fancy. I only pay for the usage on the HTC One when I need it. Or if I need a mobile hotspot that day, I bring both phones and turn one into a mobile hotspot and use the other phone as my main phone. The reason I can do this is not because I'm sort of fancy and some sort of excessive purchaser. It's because the value on Ting is completely flipped. The value is no longer held by the big telco. The value is in your hands. Because you own that device outright, there's no incentive for you not to keep using it for as long as you want and stretching the most value out of it as possible. If you're a developer, you've got to go check this out because this is a better way to manage multiple devices. Ting has an excellent dashboard that lets you keep track of all of these devices, turn them on and off as you need them, set up call forwarding, monitor your usage. It's like Ting was created for developers. So go over to coderradio.ting.com, go check them out, see what I've been saying, try that savings calculator, and a big thank you to Ting for sponsoring the Coder Radio program. So I want to talk about responding, because I think one of the things people, even though they know this, they really need to understand that anything you say in a public forum in response to criticism about your app or whatever it is will be saved forever. And you can count on it coming back up, and you can count on people relinking it to you, and you can count on whenever somebody's talking bad about you, linking to that thread somewhere. And it is a problem that you will never get away from, because it's saved on the internet forever. And so you've really got to be careful on how you respond to criticism. And I know it's hard sometimes, because the stuff you create's your baby. And it's like somebody's criticizing a piece of you, because you have values and aspirations that you have built into that thing. And when somebody's criticizing it, and especially when they're wrong or they're lying, that's the worst, when they're lying. That is so hard not to just rip them up, because you've got facts on your side, you've got evidence on your side, and you've got the moral high ground. It's so hard not to go out there, but let me tell you, you never look good in those situations, and it never plays out well for you in the long run. Am I wrong, Mr. Dominic?
No, yeah, you gotta kind of keep it cool.
Yeah, I mean, you really do, because it's forever immortalized, and it sounds so obvious when I say it right now to you, dear listener, but you will be in this position at some point if you're creating something that the public consumes. And at that point, you'll feel like the rules don't apply to you. You feel like you are justified, and you feel like this is something you don't care if it's documented forever because you were right. But trust me, don't do it. I really disagree that, I mean, I guess if somebody has a good case, I'd love to have you send it in to the show. Please email us. I would love to hear an alternative opinion to this. But to me, it seems like the better option is to let your work speak for itself. To sit back, just continue doing what you do, make the thing you make, and let people decide if they like that thing or not. Right?
Yeah, I mean, it is the way it is. It's really easy to blast, a user on Twitter or a user on Google Plus or whatever. Unfortunately, you can't do that. In fact, at some point, it may just make sense not to respond to that, because that user might, he might just be having a bad day.
Yeah, that's true too, huh? Now, when you've run into this in the past, were you surprised at the level of anger that might be there for something that, is a minor issue or is maybe even a mistake?
I mean, I had someone, I think, right on the App Store, I can't believe you charged $5 for this, because GitHub was down for 20 minutes.
Right.
Which is amazing.
Right, and I think it's funny too, like, I've seen like, I'm going to stop listening and I'm going to unsubscribe because of this one thing. And, I listen to 5 shows a week, and now I'm not going to listen to any of them out of protest. What sense does that make? It's an emotional reaction, and I feel like in some cases people just wanted to be angry. Because if they gave if like that GitHub guy, right? If he gave any thought, and I mean, I'm sure if he's a GitHub user, he must technically understand that the GitHub service can go down from time to time. But that he did not give it critical thought before he ripped you up and gave it a 1-star.
Unfortunately, to me, it's just the way the internet goes, right? On the internet, people tend to be the worst version of themselves.
It's negative in the freedom dimension.
Yeah,
especially in an App Store review, when they can use an alias that they've never used before. And they can also, there's no way to respond to them.
Yeah, boy, that's so hard in the App Store, especially. Well, maybe that's a good thing in context of what I'm talking about.
In a way, it's a good thing, because it's kind of the way it is. It's,
Yeah, maybe that's why Apple doesn't allow comments. Didn't Google turn on comments recently where you can respond?
They did. Now, what's interesting is Google, they did it after they turned on Google Plus and real names. Mm-hmm. I imagine the real names has made things calm down a little bit.
Yeah. Well, here's the flip side. So I don't know, one of the things I like about Newegg is they have customer reviews in there. And I actually like it when somebody just rips up like a hardware manufacturer, and then the hardware manufacturer comes in and gives their response. And I can judge based on their response. Like, I think it does help in some respects. So that, that has sort of, I looked at that and I thought, gosh, when I read those responses, I actually appreciate that. And I thought, well, maybe I should start responding sort of like that. But it's just too much. You can't scale. You can't do it all the time. That's the other thing too, right? Is those companies, like those hardware companies, probably have dedicated people to manage PR online. That's all they do. So they have time to respond to that kind of stuff. That's the whole flip side to this, is it's a massive time sink. It's a massive energy sink, and it can be massively demotivating. And where you just kind of lose your interest or enthusiasm on working on the thing you were supposed to work on. And it can also be one of those things where you avoid your community because you don't want to deal with this completely inaccurate and BS thing or a completely hostile thing. So it can be damaging to the community too. And I think when you engage, it only stokes the fire and continues those flames and draws out the drama longer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there we go. The Coda Radio official response in communicating with your users is
don't
try to be diligent, but don't get pulled down into the flame wars. Yeah. Don't get pulled into the fire, as it were, Mr. Dominic. Well, Mr. Dominic, I think we're just about all done for this week. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
No, I think we're good for this week, and we have a special guest next week, and then we'll see where we go from there.
Well, I hope you feel better.
I might not be alive for next week, but
you're a soldier for showing up as sick as you are. Well timed on the cold medicine, sir. All right, well, we'd love to have you join us live. Come over to jblive.tv at 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern. Hang out in our chat room, help us title it. We love that. You can also contact the show. Go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com, click the contact link. And if you'd like to know when we're live in your time zone, jupiterbroadcasting.com/calendar. Now, Mr. Dominic, I always like to ask you this. Where should people follow you throughout the week?
DominicM.com or @2Manuko on Twitter.
Boom. You know what? I'm going to put links to that at the bottom of the show notes. You guys can find that over at jupiterbroadcasting.com. Look for episode 86. Links to my social profile as well. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for tuning in this week's episode of Coda Radio. See you right back here next week.